Hey guys, welcome. This is The Process. My name is Dr. John Bush. We have left the world of ADP and into the season analysis, see how those uh, things related together. What was the predictive value? Had 10 nice lessons. Please check it out. Watch those lesson videos. We're now going to take a block of lessons on the positions. We're going to do a top-down analysis and approach, and we'll talk just about that in a second. And I'm starting out with quarterback deep metrics from not I think it's 2012 to last year, and some of the other positions I go all the way back to the year 2000. So it's going to be quite a hunk of data, a lot of data points, things that we can really sink our teeth into. Again, this part of the season. This is April 2022. I'm not sure when you're listening to this, but this is that time of year where your top down work is what you need to be doing and not getting so stuck on the bottom down players per se. Things have not completely fallen into shape and won't till probably the late summer, but certainly we'll be getting closer by June. And that's when I think you're starting to reach that player centric level of analysis. So this is the deep metrics of the quarterbacks. Actually forgot how many lessons on the quarterback. It's at least 4 or 5 of these lessons. So please listen, come back, enjoy. I posted all this on Fake Pigskin, Professor's Classroom. Have my own YouTube site as well, The Process. You can find me there as well. And also, my good friend Dennis Mitchelson and myself do the Science of Fantasy podcast, and you can find those links out there on Twitter. Each one of us is on Twitter, or you can go to Fake Pigskin and we post those podcasts. I think we're up to episode 30 this week. So please jump in and join us there. And this is my own thing happening here, kind of how I'm doing. It's not going to be traditional look at things. There's plenty of the tradition out there that you can follow, and I really don't get a lot of views. That's fine. The few of you that do listen, congratulations. You're going to at least get a slice of something different. Hopefully it helps, but I guarantee you it's going to be different than the usual fare that's out there. So with that said, we will continue on. Let's go to the next slide here. Okay, so I did mention this top-down approach. This is from a paper, Analysis of a Top-Down Data Analysis Framework and Software Architecture. This is from the computer science world and Time Warsh. You can find, I think his whole paper, I think 70 something pages, is available. I just pulled this from the abstract and wanted to reference this. And pretty insightful, I think, as to the difference between bottom up and top down. And this is really critical. And you don't see this out in fantasy football Twitter land. So just to let you know, I like to understand and go both directions. So the bottom up, he says, data analytics is currently a topic's popular. Yeah, it's and not going away, folks. Fantasy football is becoming informatics based, And the old days, if you want to keep up, those days are gone, and it's now, can you handle and analyze information? So it is an informatics kind of world. So bottom-up analysis is where insights are gained by actually analyzing data. And you're saying, well, what is the difference top-down? Top-down is a systems approach, okay? System dynamics is the opposite. It's a top-down methodology by gaining the big picture. So I combine the two in my look, but I always start kind of at a certain block of material and then move down. So right now we're going from the quarterback position and then going downward from a top down, trying to understand the quarterbacks in general. What are we expecting? What have we seen? That kind of thing. So I'm trying to merge these together, and hopefully that will point us to what we need to research and figure out in the future. Hopefully some insight into 2022. So that's the hope that I have. And so that's why I'm doing these lessons. Okay, next. So let's start out with looking at very simple metrics here. This is cutting across all the quarterbacks for the years 2012 to 2021 here. So what is that? Is that 10 years? Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There you go, 10 years. So last 10 years. The average fantasy points that all quarterbacks, and we're talking quarterbacks who were in the league, it probably had at least one snap. So I'm looking at everybody. So that can be a little skewy, but we have, in a top down, you have to understand the whole process, right, before you narrow down to maybe the more important components. So we have here the average fantasy points, and we see that 2012 it was 138.8, and last year was 131.7. So in 10 years, quarterbacks pretty much have stayed close to 130 on average, all the quarterbacks, but it did decline. And I did a colorization of the data, and the top was 2013, and the next one was 2019, and then 2015. So those are the top 3 years in the last 10. 2016 and 17 were the worst years. So they're, again, if you're curious about that, it tells you those are the years that might be very interesting to study. Kind of the extremes, any kind of data extremes should not be ignored. There's probably some lessons and secret stuff there that, people that are really into the data would want to investigate. So this points out those years, and you can kind of see the movement of the data as it goes for the last 10 years. So that's the average. Median is a really interesting stat that I think kind of clarifies for us. And what that is the 50 percentile of the population. So what does that mean? That means in, say, 100 people, right, what is the exact 50th percentile of any data category you're measuring? Let's say height, right? So if you took 100 basketball players and took the median of their height, that would be interesting, especially if you compared them to horse racing jockeys and took the median of the height. You would see big differences there. So I think it clarifies things and in some ways focuses in on the nature of the data, which was in fact in the year fantasy points. And we see 2012, the median of all quarterbacks was 94.9, and last year was 61.6. So that tells you that's quite a skew. That's almost, what, 33 points different there. So that tells me, and look at 2020, it was 66. So when I look at this, it looks like things have really been intriguing. 12, 13, 14, and 15. Look at the median points, and then it starts really dropping in the last 6 years. If you looked at the data there, so that probably, and I'm guessing, and if I was curious, I would get further, but if the population was different, in other words, we have a lot more quarterbacks on teams than we used to, that might explain the data. A lot of backup quarterbacks. I don't know the number of quarterbacks teams carry on average, for backups. I'm assuming at least 3. So what is that, about 100 quarterbacks every year that theoretically can be measured. So maybe, in the earlier part of this segment, there were, lesser quarterbacks, so you would get a higher median. The next category is standard deviation. That is the population deviance from the average here. And this, I think, gives us insight into the uncertainty of each year. And we can see that in the last 2 years, we've had some of the highest uncertainty that has existed in the quarterbacks. So that always is a little tricky. What that's telling you is that things are not as stable in the whole quarterback population as far as scoring fantasy points. Injuries, moving quarterbacks in and out, maybe rookies playing, sometime during the season. Lots of different moving pieces there. But be aware, the last 2 years, we've seen some pretty high uncertainty levels here, is measured by the standard deviation of the population. So I like to look at the table, and I think it's important to look at the actual visual metrics here. So what I have are the average, in the red diamonds, and that's for each year, 2012 to 2021. The median is in the green pyramids there, and the standard deviation is the orange circles. And then you see something called poly. That's a polynomial trend line, which I think is more insightful than just traditional linear trend lines here. And so when we look at the average, we can see that we've had some really poor years, 2016 and 17. Look at the data, really dropped out there. So the quarterback population over the last 10 years will be a lot more steady without those really interesting down years. So I think, there is some uncertainty here, and probably, especially if I was in a super flex, and I don't know if I am in a super flex, I might do some research. I don't know if I got time to do it, but I would suggest, if that's something you're interested in, go find out what happened in 2016 and 17. It's really, really intriguing. And so the polynomial trend line for that average fantasy points is red dashes here. The blue line is the median, and you see it's a little more clear to me. Notice that we dropped in 2016. But we really haven't gone up much. So things have really changed in the data versus the earlier part of this 10-year window. So there was, again, probably the population of quarterbacks, the number that teams carried, something or the way they use quarterbacks is different now than it was in the early 2012, 13, 14 years, maybe even to 15 there. So something's going on in that world as well. There's some secrets there. I'm not sure I'm going to get into how much depth here, but just wanted to alert you. So again, top-down approaches. We're looking at the complete, if you consider a system, the quarterback system. And it's really spotlighting some areas of really probably minute, and very few people would probably be interested. But, you know, it is what it is, and that's what the median and the average fantasy point trend lines are revealing to us. The variation is shown in orange, the orange trend line. And last couple of years, we did have some of the highest variation, therefore a little bit more uncertainty in the mix. So probably in the drafting, just be aware that, you know, if you're kind of thinking back, you know, the last 10 years, the last 2 years have been the most variation that you know, seen probably in the last 4 years, if you look at 2018. So there's some variation on production of quarterbacks there. So just be aware of that potential situation there. So just in the back of my head. Another thing that was for quarterbacks was interesting to me was data that I generated, and I just used 2017, 18, 19, 20, and 21. And I have something called that year and its difference. So I just looked at the top group of quarterbacks and compared them in 2021 to 2020, or 2020 to 2019, 2019 to 2018, and so forth. So what you're seeing is the player here, and then the difference from year to year. And so in the top group, look at these numbers. We've only had, really 3 quarterbacks last year that were pretty high in the change. They actually declined. We had 3 quarterbacks that actually increased. And look at the level of increasing really a lot. So just realize that things can happen from year to year, and you could get some dramatic upside between years to year, but not as much as you would think. My dog's going nuts. So I wanted to ask the question, how is the year-to-year variation? And so this data tells me that, you know, in some of the top groups here, there's, you know, going to be 3 or 4 high, 3 or 4 low, and the rest are about the same. So it's not like every year there's dramatic changes, okay? So there are groups that pretty much stay like they were last year. So when people look at last year, say 2020, to predict 2021, or as we're going to do this year, 2021 to 2022, the good news for you guys is that a lot of times the quarterback you think you had last year is going to be close to what you'll get this year. There are some exceptions, but it looks like the upside is higher than the downside. I think that's interesting. In 2020, we saw 2 that are extreme. And it seemed like there was a little bit more of the high side in 2020 versus 2019. Looking across 2019 to 2018, I see 3 nice upticks versus maybe 4. And you go back to 2018, 2017. Again, I don't know when people look year to year but it's not as dramatic. I mean, some people, oh, I'm out on quarterback X or Y. If they did pretty good last year, some of these year-to-year data, I'm not sure I'm so scared of, the specific performance this year based on last year's number. I mean, it's not exact. I mean, if all these were zeros, then that would mean it was the exact same production. And of course, we don't see that. But it's not like, 10, 15 are all super high or 10 or 15 are all super low. So there's no extremes that way. There are some extremes, high and low, but it looks like the upside is better. And so we actually are going to enjoy an advantage hanging around the top quarterbacks from 2021 going into 2022. So it's probably less of a surprise than you think. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 that are really going to surprise us this year. Okay, so this data tells me, if I'm really needing that upside, I better, especially in the superflex, I would definitely dig deep, deep, deep. So with that kind of overview, I wanted to look at this information. So I combined all the year-to-year differences of end of the season fantasy points in 2017 to 2021 in quarterbacks in the top 50%. So in the top group of quarterbacks, sometimes it was at least 10 out of the top 20, right? So 50%. So at least 10. Some years it was a few more. But anyway, what you see is something called a box and whisker. And this is measuring and gives us really important information here. And I'll explain what that is. And that's really in the orange here. I actually signed the numbers here. And so over the, 6 years, the best a quarterback did was Mahomes in 2018. He barely played 2017. So, that's probably a little funky. Here's some other ones. So we only had 3 that are really outliers, but 99% of the top quarterbacks from year-to-year differences, the high was about 300 and the low was 150. So again, the low is about half the upside. So the downside is really skewed towards the upside of the top quarterback. So it's almost like you get almost a free square. Like if you're staying in the top, 10 quarterbacks in 2021, the worst you're going to do is 150 points on average. And this is 99% of the population. That's what these little lines at the end, there's 99% of the population. So 66% of the population is between 108 year-to-year positive versus minus 20. So it even gets sweeter that about 2/3 of the top 10 or so, top 50% of quarterbacks, which was at least the top 10. So 6 out of 10 are going to be close to the same. So if you can figure out who that is, you certainly got a nice safety net here. I've never heard anybody discuss this data at all. So congratulations, you guys that are listening to me, because, if you look out there on Twitter, it's chaos out there and nobody is presenting their data. I guess maybe you have to go pay for it. I don't know. But anyway, this is very intriguing for me. Certainly takes a lot of worry off my shoulders in my 2022 drafting of quarterbacks. Very intriguing, I thought. Okay, moving on. So I looked at the year sector. So then I expanded this a little bit and I asked the quarterback average fantasy points. And I will say that above 2012 to 2018, 134. The last 3 years, 137. So that's really good. Look at the blocks before. It's like 111. So something really has changed in the complete, let's call it the quarterback system over the last 21 years. And things have really changed. And you're getting a lot more points out of your quarterbacks now. So it's a passing league, people say. I think one would predict if that's the case, you would see more fantasy point averages higher with quarterbacks, and that's what we're seeing here. And I just plotted this out just in a bar graph and just showed you we're really, it's a different world now. So in some ways you need to kind of forget about 2011 back. What you thought you knew about quarterbacks really changed in 2012 and up. And most people that are new don't realize there was any other way other than that. But I like a long view just to make sure I got the whole concept, the whole system in my head kind of straight. So I did look at the counts of the average fantasy points from 2000 to 2021. Here's the average fantasy points year to year. And I colorized, and you can see about 2012, 11, things really have changed except for 2016 and 17. And notice those were the poorest years in the last 10, and those themselves were pretty much higher than anything that existed 2010 backward. Isn't that interesting? That the worst in the last 10 years were better than all the yearly stats from that situation. Here's the number of quarterbacks, and notice we used to actually have lesser quarterbacks, and that changed, and we dropped. And looks like it's somewhere between 70 and 80 quarterbacks in the database here. So when I said 100, I was guessing it's closer to 75 probably. Certainly 80, and maybe some at the 90 there. And this is just scaled over the 21-year average, this data. And I plotted that just to look at the trends. And it's pretty clear that after 2011, times are really good for quarterbacks. Even, like I said, 2016 and 17, they still were above the 21-year average here. So I think this is telling us a few things. The year-to-year difference, the changes that have happened. So quarterbacks are going to give us more points for our fantasy team. 6 of the 10 last year top quarterbacks, or 12, whatever the top 50% were in fantasy points. Are going to do pretty well. I think about 60%. So you got about a 60% shot, not even doing any research and just picking. Okay, and so that would tend to want to pick the ones later in your draft so you can get higher ranked running backs and wide receivers. Hence the late quarterback drafting concept. And again, the data, the metrics, all support that. The year to year, I don't know what people originally used to come up with late quarterback, but from my view, how I'm looking at the top-down work, it certainly supports that as a drafting mechanism here as well. So that's all I wanted to say here and for this block of material. So thanks for listening. We're going to get even deeper still into the metrics, looking at quarterbacks and ages, and were the rookie quarterbacks, the ancient quarterbacks, what about rushing quarterbacks and passing quarterbacks, and we're going to get through and tear all that data down in the next lessons. and then we'll hit the running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers. Probably for April and probably even May, I'll still be doing this. And again, no worries, because we shouldn't probably be seriously drafting, redraft, or anything until June. If you're a dynasty player, that's different. Now's the time to play best ball, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm not doing any kind of redraft. It's all best ball play for me, and we'll have a lesson or two on that down the road. Okay, this is Dr. Bush for the process. Hope you enjoyed it. Please come back.